Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Take a minute to really think about those words. The words pierce my heart these days because our circle is so disjointed and our planet is in disarray. The fires in Sonoma are finally starting to settle, but they seem to be getting worse down south. The stories of loss are excruciating, and the worry that we ourselves are confronted with is almost too much to bear. As painful as it is, though, I am repeatedly reminded how disasters can bring out the best in people. How they can remind us to stop what we're doing, put down our phones, come together, and just care for one another. I remember the stories 2 years ago about firefighters, police officers, faith organizations, and schools collecting supplies, money, making food for people who were displaced. It was truly heartening to see. The immediate response from people is overwhelmingly beautiful. Wildfires have a way of bringing us together because there is a certain way in which it reminds us of our common humanity, how similar we really are, how vulnerable we are to losing everything and everyone in a moment. Our hearts can't help but ache because we know it could have been us. And our better angels kick into high gear, forgetting all the things that separate and divide us, seeing only the human souls before us. Because wildfires don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, what religion you are, what race you are, what gender you are, or what age you are. They don't care if you are rich or poor. They are simply non-discriminating destruction. And that is why we come together. Because in the face of destruction, the only force more powerful is community. We remember our moments of trauma and how deeply community helped us survive our darkest moments. So a broader we emerges, and we become that larger community of care and support. And it is wondrous. But then another disaster emerges, and our energies necessarily shift. And then another one comes, and another one. And at a certain point, we start to reach disaster fatigue. Throw our hands up and ask if this is the new normal. Because we don't have the bandwidth to be in a perpetual state of rallying for strangers who've lost everything. It is a natural human phenomenon that once the scale and timetable reach a certain point, it gets increasingly harder to grasp because we can't personally relate to it. It's why we need anecdotes and stories. Because the story of a person telling of their dramatic evacuation hits home more deeply for many of us than the number 180,000. The number of people who had to evacuate last week in the North Bay. Scale is everything. Because as a human being, I just don't have in my capability the ability to sit with and empathize with 180,000 stories of the pain, loss, and dread that goes with evacuating your home. My empathy has its limits, and that would be too much for me to bear, for anyone to. I know that right now, people are giving so much from their own hearts and resources to those in Sonoma and Southern California. But history tells us that all that goodness will come to an end because a new disaster will demand our attention. And all those distinctions that didn't matter in the moment suddenly come tumbling back when it's time to move from the immediate trauma to the attempt to rebuild. Because for those with means who lost their homes, there is a story of redemption available to them that isn't available for those without. Pete lived in Sonoma for decades with a beautiful home that he lost in 2017. All of his memories were wiped away. But he was determined to rebuild his life and rebuild his dreams in the process. With the insurance money that he received and a little extra from his own wealth, he has a new home that feels like a happily ever after. He will always be pained at his loss, but he sees his new house as a sign of resilience. But Gina wasn't so lucky. When her uninsured trailer burned down in Paradise last year while she was awaiting surgery, she was homeless. A couple months ago, she moved into a trailer camp for fire survivors while they have a fixed income of $850 a month. Without a house, without a job, without a real network of support, where is Gina's path to redemption? For Gina, she shared her version of resilience is trying to talk herself out of ending her life every day. That's a pretty stark contrast to Pete. It seems pretty clear that we're witnessing the first wave of climate refugees here in California. And as is the case with most type of refugees, those who are going to pay the highest price are those who already live in poverty. Unfortunately, a different picture begins to emerge out of disaster, one that does discriminate based on wealth. Because I believe that resiliency and redemption shouldn't be based on how much money you have. It is an affront to our first principle. And yet that's exactly where we are. Amid our climate disaster and a state on fire, another intersectional enemy emerges: poverty. When we lost power up in Petaluma, it was frustrating. But it wasn't our life on the line. The kitchen staff at the retreat center, who had to cancel all other reservations, probably had a different story to tell. And for people like Tara Drolma, the power shutdowns could be catastrophic. Without financial resources or a network to get her help, she had to choose between charging her electric wheelchair or her heart monitor. Others have more basic needs that will go unmet. Those in poverty rely on being able to keep food in their fridge. If you are constantly worried about your next meal, imagine having the next several taken away. Or medications that call for refrigeration. Or having our homes heated. Yesterday morning was 39 degrees. I cannot even begin to wrap my head around how dangerous that would be for my daughter. But at the end of the day, I could put Tally in my car, drive to a hotel that has heat, and stay there without issue. The power outages may have saved additional fires, even additional lives. But I can find a way around the hardships precisely because I don't live in poverty. When poverty meets climate change, which it is doing so in rapid succession, it becomes a destructive force just like wildfires. So what if we treated the system of poverty as we did wildfires? Attention would only be the beginning of our journey. Because not only am I paying attention to wildfires, I have to be intentional about the decisions I make. Being intentional means being climate conscious. No open flames, no candles, no long walks with Tally and Angie until I know that the air is safe. Those are all spiritual practices of mine. But at a certain point, fire safety comes first. I am willing to sacrifice the little pleasures for the good of others. So the question that comes up for me is, how can I not only be attentive to poverty, but intentional about the decisions that I make? What am I willing to sacrifice for the good of others? And are we destined to simply watch for inevitable destruction and respond like we do with wildfires? I don't think so. What makes poverty different from wildfires is that we actually have so much more power in combating the disaster of poverty than we do against wildfires. Mary Oliver wrote that attention is the beginning of devotion. And in that, I think she gives us a roadmap to engaging with poverty. Paying attention to our kindred whose lives are impeded by a system that works diligently to keep them impoverished is only the beginning. In order to truly combat poverty, we must also combat greed. And that means being devoted to those who are living in poverty and putting that devotion first. When people are not treated with worth and dignity, we are called to bring our innermost devotion to their well-being. There's a Christian teaching that says you cannot serve both money and God. And from a Unitarian Universalist perspective, I think the same can be said, that you cannot serve both money and humanity. The foundation of humanism is a devotion to humankind. And that devotion calls us to use the power we have to raise up the impoverished and bring down the greedy. I wish that I could tell you with certainty that redemption will come to us all. That we should have hope, that the future is brighter. But the truth is, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. What I do know is that power does not give itself up. When I started this sermon, I told you that the only thing more powerful than destruction is community. And it is. But we cannot wait for disaster to strike to create that global community. Disaster is already here in poverty. And the global community that can care for each other must come first. We must rid ourselves of the fallacy that the only foundation of humanism is individualism. Freedom of conscience matters, but not at the expense of other people's right to live, eat, have a roof over their heads. I should not have the freedom to amass all the money in the world if it takes away millions of people's right to have any hope of upward mobility. That is an individual freedom that sacrifices collective freedom. I'm not advocating for or against a particular economic system. What I'm advocating for is a theological system. Because humanism, at its core, is about enabling the communal good. Believe me when I say that my first draw to Unitarian Universalism was the individual freedom that it allowed. My right to be who I am unapologetically. But my freedom does not extend to harming others. I stand here as a person who comes from incredible wealth. Wealth that has literally saved my life on more than one occasion, and I do mean literally. That wealth has given me the best possible education, and that wealth has most likely taken opportunities away from others, which is something I will have to grapple with for my whole life. But I do believe we have a way forward, even if I don't know what the future holds. I believe in the power of community. I believe in the power of us. Today, part of our donations will be going to Partners for Change, an organization that specifically works with people in poverty, using the power of community to elevate them, give them a network, and give them a chance. And I believe that we are part of that charge, that we can do that on a massive scale, that we must do that on a massive scale. And yes, it does start small. But community calls us to extend outward until it reaches everyone, so that the next time our beloved California catches fire, probably next October, we can say that we will all rise from the ashes. Most of us, perhaps not all of us, are fortunate enough to say that we have most of our lives intact. But the ashes of poverty are all around us. So today, let's dig deep to pull our kindred out, because we don't know how this day will end. But we know it has to change for a new day to begin. So the choice is ours. Are we individuals first? Or are we a community first? I know my answer. I hope you'll join me. Blessed be, and amen.